Stoicism and Buddhism both tend to address the core problem of self. So salespeople, recruitment people will recognize this.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Recruiting Better with me, Ben Browning. And this week I am joined by the awesome Jack Frimston and Zac Thompson of We Have a Meeting.
You are chained to a madman at all times who is in your head screaming about you every moment of the day. And Stoicism and Buddhism and probably other isms out there are antidotes to that.
Jack and Zac have an amazing presence on social media and have risen to fame as the hosts of the We Have a Podcast sales podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by them.
So are you disciplined with your own mind? When you are having a particularly good month in recruitment, do you think that's purely down to you?
We're going to be breaking down a little bit of the concept and the mythology around cold calling. We're going to be breaking down a little bit of the philosophy of Stoicism and how that impacts sales in their work.
If you do, you'll find that it's probably quite an emotional road in recruitment, right?
And we're also going to be talking about how can you motivate a team to get on the phone and do high quality sales activity over the phone in recruitment. So if you're a recruiter, a leader, a billing manager, or anything in between, you're going to absolutely love this episode.
Real quick before we begin. Working with over 1,000 recruiters, I've seen the same thing time and time again. The challenge of always being on a roller coaster of results and just wanting a consistent way to win new, exclusive and retained business. To help figure out how you can get there, I've created a business development assessment, a way to test your strategy. It's a simple process with a few questions designed to give you actionable steps that you need to win consistent business for your agency. Whether you're a leader or a top biller, hundreds of recruiters have already used this assessment to jumpstart their growth, including million-dollar billers. And as a valued listener to the show, I've included a link so you can access it for free right now in the show notes. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please go check it out. And now let's get on with the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Recruiting Better. This week, I'm joined by the amazing Zac Thompson and Jack Frimston from We Have a Meeting. Gents, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
It's good to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah, it wouldn't be anywhere else, right? So, look, on the agenda today for us, and anyone who spends any time on social media will recognize the two of you as being people who are really leading the conversation around what sales looks like today, both in terms of different methodologies. Predominantly, of course, you guys are well known for your work on the phone and cold calling, but also kind of building out sales strategies with the sales consulting that you do with businesses, including a large number of recruiters. So I'm really looking forward to breaking this down, getting really tactical. For everybody listening, this is going to be a real breakdown of how to go about creating sales methodologies and using the phone to win new business. So whether you're a consultant or a leader or anything in between, you're going to take a lot from this episode. So throwing this over to you guys right now, like, what do you see as being the most effective ways of generating business for your clients?
I mean, bread and butter, if you're looking to get through to actual decision makers, is going to be cold calling, right? But I want to give that some weight as to why. I think it's not just good to say, here's what I think. It has to be challenged. So our brains are incredibly receptive to patterns, right? So they will notice patterns. So if I think I'm a CEO where people are trying to sell to me, what is the pattern of people trying to sell to me? It will be thousands of LinkedIn messages. It will be thousands of emails. The novelty has probably completely gone from both of those channels. It's probably very tired. I'm used to the pattern of what that looks like. Whereas a well-placed, well-timed, well-delivered cold call is now novel again. Probably in the same way that sending someone a physical letter in the post is much more novel than writing an email that was really, really personalized. That same personalization is probably better crafted in sending something out as physical direct mail.
Yeah, right.
So for us, in terms of actually getting hold of people, it's on the phone. Secondly, your ability to truly qualify someone. I'm of the opinion, and I'm happy to be challenged on this, you cannot truly qualify someone over an email or a LinkedIn message. So even if you can generate interest through those channels, there should always be a pre-qualification conversation that takes place. So the conversation around cold calling is dead. There needs to be some sort of conversation first that warrants you even having a discovery call or a meeting or whatever your process is. Jack, I don't know if you've got anything you want to bolt on top of that.
We have a bit of a cultural message within our organisations, and that is not all meetings are created equally. And I think that anybody that's worked in sales will know that if you sit an inbound lead, if you sit a referral, if you sit a email meeting, a cold call meeting, there are varying degrees of what a meeting can actually be and what qualification is. So I think one of the things that salespeople definitely need to do is, what is the qualification process? What do they want for those meetings?
Yeah, right.
And unfortunately, when people are struggling to fill the top of funnel, they will kind of run around for the scraps. And that is where people say, well, I'll sit down with anybody that's in my ICP. I'll sit down as long as they're this person, this company, I'll sit down with them. But that's kind of not respecting your time or the prospect's time. So when you think about email, people send thousands of emails, they send thousands of LinkedIn messages with the intention to actually have a conversation with that person. I just want to have a conversation with you, Ben, and say, do you have the problems that we solve? And are you motivated? So if the intention is to have a conversation, for me personally, and I understand that I live in an echo chamber and my solution that I sell is also part of this, but why would you not just pick up the phone and have that conversation?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, right? I think that's absolutely right. Particularly, with those points that you mentioned, Zach, that piece around that, we hear a lot about this phrase around pattern interrupt. I think it's really important that we understand what that is. So much of the conversation we see these days, probably triggered by our mutual friend Benjamin Dennehy, around cold call openers and the way people start conversations, uses this language of pattern interrupts. Well, I think we need to really understand that properly. So much of that, the narrative, I think, probably gets that, misunderstands what that really means. So you're right. We've got this. If I receive an email, if I receive a DM, then I know exactly what I'm going to do with that. I'm either going to reply with a one-word answer or a one-line answer, just a couple of words saying yes, or I'm going to delete it. And of course, the sender gets very little feedback off the back of that, versus, as you say, that ability to qualify that opportunity. So that makes a lot of sense. Look, one of the things that I mentioned to you before we hopped on the call is like this idea that consistently you get some people who will say off the back of any mention of cold calling, isn't that really old school? So do you think it's still like, not in terms of like, is it dead? I don't want to go down that route, but like, what do you think the specific value of kind of phone-based outreach is right now, in terms of, it's so much easier to send emails, it's so much easier to send DMs. We've got AI that can kind of do a lot of that writing for us, although not very well. What do you see as the role of cold calling over the next few years as this landscape kind of develops?
It's a good question. I think the thing to remember is, what is the purpose that we're looking for here? And I know we've all probably got slightly different stances on what a playbook is and what a qualified lead is and a qualified appointment is. For us, we've got a playbook that we follow, but very, very simplified down. Maybe we can get into the weeds a bit, but simplified down, it is, does the person you're speaking to have a problem, and is there a clear motivation to fix it? And it probably feels very similar to a therapy style conversation. We're of the opinion that a good conversation in sales is probably very similar to a good therapy conversation. Those conversations cannot take place anywhere other than either in person or on the phone, right? But you're not going to be going around knocking on people's doors anymore. It's not efficient. So the phone is probably the only way to do that. And I would ask people, if that is the goal, would you be comfortable having a conversation with your therapist over email? Would you be comfortable if I said, don't worry about seeing that therapist, I've just basically programmed ChatGPT, tell it all your most intimate details of your life, and it'll be a therapist for you? It not only does AI not have the ability to really read the room, and email doesn't either, LinkedIn doesn't either. So for me, done properly, I don't think cold calling and physical human-to-human conversations are really going anywhere.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. And it feels like people are kind of really, want that human connection more than ever against, everything that we're, kind of experiencing via email and DMs and the impact of AI. I just feel like, as you say, there's that human to human connection. This kind of idea of qualification has come up a couple of times. I want to come back to you, Jack, actually, on the point around, you say that not all meetings are created equal. I think I understand what you mean by that, but can you tell us a little bit more about that, and also maybe tell us what you see as being the differences or the relative value of meetings from different types of sources?
Yeah, so not all meetings are created equally, is we know that this is where marketing gets involved as well, and people have preconceived ideas of what you do, what you are. One of the analogies that we use with email and LinkedIn. It's not to say that they don't have a place in the sales cycle. Okay. It's not to say that I don't think we've ever kind of pushed that. We're big and we're kind of against booking meetings from using those channels. The analogy to kind of break it down into its simplest form is think about you're going fishing. Okay. You're a brilliant fisherman. Your job is to catch the biggest fish. Well, actually, all the good fish, the CEOs, they're at the bottom of the pond. Nice. So what can I do to get them to come to the top? Because we know that there are going to be busy people that no matter how many times you call them, they're always going to be in meetings. So how do we get their attention? So email and LinkedIn can be used as a tool, especially email, because 9 times out of 10, when somebody will reply, they'll have a number there. And especially when you're playing games of, I can't get their information or I can't get their detail, and we can touch on data providers. So it's a case of like, I'm going to throw these breadcrumbs, these emails onto the pond and see what kind of information I can gather. If you break it down, like you must have sat a referral meeting, and we know that when we think about influence, social proof is one of the biggest things. So if you've already like sung my praises, well, actually, you're probably just coming to the meeting to say, I just want to kind of make sure everything checks out, make sure he's not an axe murderer, and make sure he kind of aligns with what we're trying to do. When it's completely cold, they're further down the spectrum, they're further down the funnel. It's your job to actually find out if the motivation is there. So are people problem aware? Are they solution aware? Do they know exactly what company they want to work with? And then if they do, then it's just a case of like fixing those boxes or sorting out what the payment terms are. So it's about understanding where your customer is, your prospect is on their buying journey. And the only way to do that is by asking good, well-rounded therapeutic questions, IMO, in my opinion.
I think there's a really interesting point there, which is something that I run into a lot. You know, more and more we see, I think probably because in many ways, you might disagree with this, be interesting on your view on it, but it feels as though selling has got harder. I think that particularly the way the economy was last year has made businesses and corporations more reluctant to make decisions. It's probably slowed decision making down as well and made everybody a little bit reluctant to, you know, take responsibility for making the wrong decision. I'm reading Jolt Effect by Matt Dixon recently, and there's a real kind of, you know, that idea of decisions by omission rather than commission, and that idea that people would rather not take decisions rather than make a bad one. So I think probably selling, from my perspective, looks like it has got a bit harder. And so as a result, people have gravitated towards some of the easier or some of the routes that look like they're easier to generate meetings. And one of those is clearly lots of people talking about inbound. Now, I'm sure you guys generate masses of really good quality inbound leads with all the social media presence you have and the podcast and all the rest of it. But there is also this experience that my clients talk to me about, which is that they thought, you know, they've put loads of effort into inbound, and then the quality of the meetings that they're actually sitting are not quite what they want them to be, right? Now, that could be a failure on the part of their marketing. But when you compare that to the meetings that they're booking when they actually do go out and do the proactive work, it's chalk and cheese. So I don't know whether you're seeing anything along those lines.
I have some advice for that, actually, for the inbound thing, some quite practical advice. So if people follow me on LinkedIn, or you don't even have to follow me to do this. So there's a little form.
But they should. But they definitely should.
But they should. But I'm not attached to it. If you don't want to, I'm not a very nice person. You can follow Jack instead. But if you follow me, there's a form, right, to book a meeting with me. And it's actually incredibly difficult to book that meeting with me. I tell you how much it costs to work with us. I ask how confident you are in your ability to sell. I ask you to define what you do. I'd ask you how willing you are to actually work with us. I make it really hard for someone to actually book into my diary so that when they do get there and they're sat with me, they're pre-qualified. And I think this is where it goes wrong. We almost, when someone comes in as an inbound, give them the VIP treatment straight away before really asking the difficult questions. If you could have the same discipline with both cold and inbound, what you end up with is something that's quite predictable. You take the feeling out. Yeah, so, right. And then probably your process is more around, if I have X amount of conversations, I close X amount of deals, rather than, oh, some inbound's good, some's bad, I don't really know why. I would implore people to have some sort of process at the start that makes it a bit harder.
Yeah, right.
And there's evidence for this, right? If you are someone who wears a Rolex, if you feel like you need to do that, if your parents didn't love you enough, But if you're someone who wears a Rolex, you can't just go into a shop and buy a Rolex. What happens is they put you on a list. They make it quite hard for you to buy so that you value the purchase more.
Okay.
So they put you on a waiting list. They kind of talk you out of it a little bit. They do a lot of these kind of more modern sales approaches. But the reason that they do that is so that you value the purchase more. So making it much harder for someone to book in with you means that they will value that meeting much more.
Yeah, right. I love that story about Rolex making it harder for you to buy, and the way that you've used that in your inbound leads makes a lot of sense. I think people should absolutely be taking heed of that. I'm going to have to put a disclaimer at the start of the show now though, Zac, because you mentioned a word that terrifies a lot of recruiters, and that is the word discipline. And then you followed it up with the word process. So, geez, we're going to have to kind of go over that, because there's this really interesting part, isn't there? That so much of what we do in sales methodology and so much of what I see you guys talk about is that clarity of process and discipline almost. So I wonder if it might make sense to kind of flip to just talking a little bit about the kind of that sales playbook, that process itself, and what you mean about kind of discipline and almost taking the feeling out of it. Can you take us through that, and maybe, Jack, give us some kind of pointers on what that kind of playbook looks like if you're working with a recruiter or building something out for one of your clients?
I think the first thing, if we're talking about discipline, is if you are a recruiter that is listening to this now, and I ask you to pull up your diary, what does your diary look like? If it's the odd new business meeting here and there, and maybe you've got like a buzz meeting on a Monday and something beers on a Friday afternoon, classic recruiter. But discipline doesn't just happen overnight. Like, you have to be very kind of intentional with it. So what do I want to achieve? And one of the things that we talk about, and I did a post recently about it, is this equation. So everything can be broken down into a very simple equation. So I'm not very good at maths, but maths is life. So what is it that you want to achieve? Is it that you want to buy that Rolex? Is it that you want to hit President's Club? Is it that you want to get promoted, etc., etc., etc.? I'd understand the why. So why do you do that? And that why can be taken down to many different levels. So why do you do that? But why is that important? But why do you want that respect? So you're really understanding yourself. So it is going to take like a level of self-awareness. And then when you think about, okay, well, this is why I'm doing it, and this is what I want to do, what are the things that need to go into this? And everything can be broken down. Obviously, there are things like luck and getting lucky, but how do you make yourself luckier? How do you bring yourself more opportunities? And it is doing the obvious things. So if you want to hit target, you're a recruiter, well, you know that you probably need to speak to X amount of new businesses. If you want to place a candidate, well, you probably have like an equation of, I know that typically I have to reach out to 15 candidates on LinkedIn Recruiter, or I have to call 4 of them, whatever it is. What is the obvious thing that you need to do consistently? And it's just kind of working it backwards and not saying, well, actually, this one time I did 4 and this one time I did 7, so I'll just do 4 and hope for the best. It's picking a system that actually is going to work for you. So that one of the things that Zac did in the early days of We Have a Meeting, if I book 2 meetings a day and there's 20 working days, and he might get up on a Sunday and do a bit of cold calling back in the day, but I know that every month I'm going to have 40 booked meetings. Okay, the industry average is 70%. So based on that, you probably get in 28. Maybe he is good at maths. So 28 meetings, but Zac's really good at sales. So 40 meetings are going to attend.
Yeah, right.
If I sit down with 40 decision makers every month and only need 5 clients, will it be ridiculous for me not to achieve those results? So look back at yourself and go, oh, I didn't hit target that month. Was the input there? Did you do what was required? So discipline is, like you say, it's a word that gets thrown around, of discipline, but actually pad out your calendar, put your time blocks in, and whatever the playbook may be. I don't think it's fair of us to dictate what you should be doing. Maybe it is sending LinkedIn messages. Maybe it is working on the email cadence. Maybe there is that time for the cold calling. Maybe I only sit meetings on this time. I do all my admin at 5:30 rather than doing it in the day. I don't open my emails until 12 o'clock because I want my first cold calling block to be there. So I'm focused and my attention's not diverted. Doing all of those things, well, then actually you built the blueprint. You don't need to be disciplined. You just need to follow the path.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that totally. The word that comes to mind is intentionality. And obviously you both very heavily it feels like at least you both very heavily lean on Stoicism and talk a lot about kind of Stoic philosophy. And of course, you've got your new podcast as well. So I feel like that idea of intentionality, focus, and almost making discipline as easy as possible. Right. I think the Ryan Holiday book is Discipline is Destiny, so creating that vision and keeping aligned with that, but then making things as easy as possible on a day to day so that actually the discipline bit, it's like the other thing that comes to mind is if you want to go on a diet, like clear your fridge out of all the crap. Right? Like, because it's really hard to have discipline. But if all you've got in your fridge are the ingredients for the healthy meals you can eat that day, then you make life so much easier. So, yeah, it's a fair point.
Stoicism's an interesting one as well, because Stoicism isn't just the act of doing the thing, it's having the discipline around the idea of self as well. And I don't know how deep you want to get into that, but Stoicism and Buddhism both tend to address the core problem of self. So salespeople, recruitment people will recognize this. You are chained to a madman at all times who is in your head screaming about you every moment of the day. And Stoicism and Buddhism and probably other isms out there are antidotes to that. So are you disciplined with your own mind? When you are having a particularly good month in recruitment, do you think that's purely down to you? If you do, you'll find that it's probably quite an emotional road in recruitment, right?
A roller coaster. People commonly talk about the recruitment roller coaster, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's also having the discipline over your own mind as well, and trying to, if possible, remove the idea of self. The best salespeople, the best people I've worked with in recruitment have this kind of gentle indifference, not robotic, but just, of course I didn't get enough this month because I didn't do enough. Of course I got enough this month because I put the work in. And it's kind of a gentle indifference to whichever way that the wind blows.
Yeah. The other thing that I think comes along with that as well, and is probably wrapped up in it, is this idea of the internal locus of control, right? Is that internal responsibility. So, yes, maybe I was unlucky last quarter, right? But as a salesperson, as a recruiter, I actually don't get the luxury of kind of attaching my results to luck. Like, all I can do is think about, my processes. So a lot of the work that we do here actually is about really working with people to help them navigate that and create a bit of a blueprint that works in spite of luck and in spite of the market and everything else. It's like, actually our daily goal is just to help people be the best salespeople they can. And again, this all too well, but that's not about being salesy. That's about, classic salesy, but that's about helping other people to make good decisions well. Supporting other people to make good decisions well. That's one I picked up from Marcus Kauke, that definition of sales. But yeah, cool. So Stoicism plays a role in the way you think about selling and that overall approach. Is there, Jack, I mean, obviously you're kind of famous for an obsession with death. So let's kind of talk a little bit about that. How does that concept, remember you will die, people will recognize from many of your LinkedIn posts, if not all of them, how does that impact the way you think about sales and kind of approach the methodology that you have, the mindset you have for selling?
So the disclaimer is I didn't invent death. And
what?
I can't claim that I did that. Remember You Will Die is obviously like a translation from Remember You Must Die, Memento Mori. The Buddhists had their own one that's far too complicated to actually pronounce, so I won't say that one. But it's about these like mantras, and I think that mantras are so important in life to have these quotes that you can think about, or these messages that you can always rely on. And actually, Remember You Will Die isn't about death at all. It's actually not one bit to do with death. It's about life, and it's about making sure that you get the most out of life. And I think that sometimes we get so caught up in the hustle and bustle of everyday life that we forget to just live. And I've been thinking about this, and I've been reading a bit more into it recently. We're so lucky. The average lifespan up until the 20th century was about 31. It's now 73. Wow. So if you grew up in the Roman Empire, you'd probably live between 25 and 30. Most people didn't even live past the age of 5. There have been 100, don't quote me on this, but from the research, 117 billion people before us, And if that meteor doesn't come along and wipe us all out in 2035, there'll probably be a quadrillion people more.
Wow.
And we think about like our impact on the world, and everybody wants to be the next Steve Jobs and Richard Branson and all these things. But actually, in the grand scheme of it, you will be forgotten. You will be forgotten. Life will move on. People will come to your funeral. They will say, oh, he was a nice person. They'll drive home. They'll get a Burger King on the way home. And 2 weeks later, they'll forget all about you. And that is just life. And I think that we get so caught up on the menial things throughout life, the things that we can't control. So you didn't hit quota. So what? You didn't book a meeting that day. So what? What can I learn from it? What can I do to get better? How can I improve? But in the grand scheme of it all, when you're lying on your deathbed, will you really be thinking about this? No, you'll probably be thinking, did I live a life that was true to me? Did I do the things that I wanted to do? If you're sat in a recruitment job at the moment and you think, what am I doing? This doesn't fulfill me. One day you'll be dead. Go and do something else. Find something that does excite you. So that's my little rant on death.
Absolutely. I don't think there's anything I can add there. Do you know what? The only thing that comes to mind is that recently I saw some statistics about the average life expectancy for kids around now. And I know that you're both fathers and got the, do you know what? In preparation, I picked up my copy of the Daily Dad this morning. It was on my bookshelf, but the statistic that I saw was that my daughter, who is now 2, is 20% more likely. In fact, there's a 24% chance that she will live to the age of 80, and there is a 4% chance that I will live to the age of 80, which is pretty eye-opening, right? So, yeah, it's coming for us all.
You're only 21 though, so
no, exactly. I know. Yeah, tough. This is what 2 years in recruitment does to you. Absolutely. I'm going to segue really awkwardly into data and into, how do we get through to people, right? So, a big leap from the philosophical to the absolutely tactical. But one of the biggest frustrations for people, clearly for, I think, all salespeople, but especially recruiters, is this idea of, look, I just can't get through. I love the idea of picking up the phone. I'd love to practice my cold calls more. I'd love to practice my intros. I'd love to record my calls, but no one's picking up the phone. So what's your kind of secret sauce or your best advice or your kind of thinking on the best ways of getting data that's going to help recruiters get through to people?
Yeah. So, I mean, once upon a time, we didn't have the luxury of data. And I don't think in my sales career before I started this business, I ever had the luxury of data. I just had, there's a phone, there's your laptop. So having data at all is a luxury. So if you're complaining about Lusher, you probably should be complaining about Lusher. But if you are complaining about Lusher, it's a luxury.
They're not a sponsor, don't worry.
Right. Okay. Well,
not yet.
So I can give you the source, but also I would implore, if you are hiring new salespeople, new recruiters, you want to generate good habits, right? And good habits would come in, like me and Jack, when we have new people starting the team, we don't give them any data to start off with, just so they learn the actual feeling of having that luxury.
Yeah. Nice.
So actually, you've got to get through all the gatekeepers. Here's a list of dream clients. Just find a way to get in touch with them. That is still something that I wouldn't disregard for hiring new people, to teach them the habits and also the awareness of having data is a luxury. So that is my preface before I jump into telling you about what data to use.
Do you know what? So I think it's such an important point, and one that is more and more overlooked. I think there is maybe a little bit of entitlement around the way people think about, like, accessing better and better quality data. And we hear the narrative, I think also is a little bit different in recruitment, because recruiters, classically can access candidates and flip people that way. But that's a really valid point. I love the fact that you start people off without the data.
So things I would suggest, right? So Cognism is going to be your best friend for UK EMEA data. I would always suggest Cognism for that. If you are someone like a lot of recruiters that we speak to at the minute who has an ambition of, you want to break into the US market, if you're doing that, I would say Zoom Info are the best. Because you're not in the same time zone, you want a power dialer to be able to ring from the UK into the US so that you can make the most of that afternoon slot. So I'd say...
Tell me a bit about that power dialer. What are you... Sorry to jump in there, but...
That's all right.
That'll be new terminology for a lot of the audience. So, yeah, what do you mean?
A power dialer is... Whenever I say this to people, it never lands well, but I just think it's important to just be really objective about what it is. It's basically something that will ring multiple people at the same time and put you through to the first person who answers.
Yep.
And you have the control over, do you want that to be, it rings 3 people at once? Do you want it to be, it rings 10 people at once? And you get a mix of people. It's quite a mad experience because you get people kind of calling you back from the calls that you've done and going through to voicemail. You can see it all happening on the screen and it just bleeps when you get through to someone. And when you get through to someone, bang, you're through to them. Connection rates tend to be lower in the US, so you want a tool like this anyway. I would also probably say if you only have small dialing windows, so you don't have the luxury of I can do cold calling all day, but to your point, Ben, it's something that someone wants to practice, I would still probably use something like Nux for the UK market and just have a power hour, a power couple of hours every day where you can have as many conversations as you need to have. So that would be the tech stack piece of it, but there are other things that can work quite well if you are looking to kind of think outside the box. One thing that we see a lot of good success in is direct mail. So if you have, a lot of people have like a dream list of, particularly if you're in a closed market. So I spoke to a guy the other week who he said he's the only recruiter for astronauts in the US and we weren't the right company for him. I was saying those 100 companies that you want to get in front of, why not send something really bespoke? So we've sent out pieces of door and pinatas and you smash them up and there's a QR code in there. There's a lot of things that you can do to send something first before you make those calls. And we find that the conversion rate on direct mail is really, really high. It's something like 1 in every 2 or 3 calls becomes a meeting because it's that reciprocity influence thing going on. The other thing that you can do is look at people who are spending money in complementary areas. So I wouldn't be able to tell you what this is in recruitment, but I'm sure it might get people's brains working. When I started my business off, I thought, where are people going and waving a flag that says I may have a lead generation problem? And where they were going was to events and exhibitions, paying money for an event stand, 40, 50 grand. And then finding that none of the leads converted or the salespeople didn't want to follow up. So I rang through an exhibitors list with no data and just said, put me through to the person who's dealing with that event. And then they were my initial meetings when I started this business off.
I love that.
And then lastly, the other place that I would suggest, LinkedIn, but specifically on the sales navigator side, if you look at people who are new to decision-making roles, so new to decision-making roles in the last 3 months, chances are they've been brought in to create change, much more so than someone who's been there for 30 years. So bit of a ramble there, but hopefully it gives people some ideas.
Absolutely belting. Yeah, love it. A couple of things there that I've seen in particular. That last one, often like with that, you get newly promoted managers as well. And in recruitment, that's great because these people have never done anything. They've never led any recruitment before, right? So they've now got responsibility for it and they haven't got relationships with other recruiters. So you don't always necessarily generate business immediately off the back of that, but it's a great opportunity for forming those longer term relationships and creating a bit of pipeline there as well. And the other thing that you mentioned, obviously, with the direct mail side of things, I recently managed to catch up with Stu Hynek ahead of the re-release of his classic book, How to Get a Meeting with Anyone, where he talks about his direct mail campaigns. And the stats on that are absolutely fascinating. I don't know whether you guys have spoken directly to Stu, but he is I know that Lewis Sandford is a big fan, and you guys obviously worked with Lewis, including Jack very famously getting out to the car park outside Manchester and smashing the door up. So smashing the door in, I should say.
Smashed it in, pulled my back. Not Zach won't let me hold a sledgehammer ever again. One thing to probably add, and it feels stupid saying it, but I'd probably like to say it to people listening. I think a lot of people wait for somebody to come and save the day, or they hold it back and they will use it as an excuse of, well, I didn't have the right contacts. I think when we started, I remember begging Zach, can we spend £30 a month for this dialer? And actually in the early days, it was like, the budget might not be there yet. But I think that if you are a salesperson, there are so many cheap tools. Yeah, you probably can't go and buy Nux individually or a Cognizant license. But do you know how many data providers there are that will probably give you just what you need for 15 quid a month?
Yeah, okay? Right.
Pay it. If you're a salesperson, you should be, especially in recruiter, and I know that they treat it like this anyway in a lot of companies, of your own desk. It is your own business. So if you're not getting the results you need or you want to exceed, put the money in, because you'll get the reward out at the end. And then if you can prove it and you've got a case study, I'm sure your boss will do that. Or if somebody did that and they bought a tool out of their own money and then I found out they hit quota before, I'd be like, bloody hell, you took the initiative. I'm actually going to promote you. You can have my job, whatever. Do you know what I mean? You'd be so impressed. So I think be proactive. Don't just wait for somebody to come and save you, because nobody's coming.
That new mic sounds great, by the way.
Thank you. It feels great, actually. I feel like a different guy today.
You know what? We've got a guy who's been on our show, and he's also been on Hisham's podcast on the Recruitment Mentors, a guy called Adam Tiberius, who I worked really closely with when he was kind of transitioning into BD manager role. And right now he's got a team of 8 across UK, Europe, and the US. He spends 80% of his time market mapping, because he says, you can do a lot with the tools and AI and all the rest of it, but there's absolutely nothing like just going through and manually mapping out what your market needs to look like. And, you know, he built $1 million himself last year. His team do 20K per head per month across all of those different markets. Actually, he's a real advocate for having a playbook, because he gets real consistency across each of his people, across each of their markets. He sees incredibly small fluctuations between the data in there. But his big thing is like, this job is boring. It's incredibly rewarding. It's really boring, because what I do is I sit there and I map markets for 80% of my time. And that's where we get all that. That's where we build all of our success. So, Adam really came to mind hearing you guys talking about that piece around getting the data and making best use of it. So we talked a little bit about your team, and I think there's also an interesting piece here around, obviously, with the work you do. One of the challenges that recruitment leaders face is motivating people to pick up the phone and doing sales activity. In fact, if I'm really honest, one of the questions that I get a lot from my clients is, Ben, you've helped us build this playbook. You've helped us build the process. Could you actually do it for us? And, you know, whenever that question comes up, I always point them in your direction. Don't worry. But there's this piece around, you know, one of the reasons I've been reluctant to create a kind of sales agency for recruiters and kind of build that out is because I know one of the biggest difficulties is hiring the right people and motivating them to really love the job. You guys are clearly, I would say, nailing that. So how do you do that?
That feels like one for you, Jack. Or
I think it goes back to that equation, doesn't it? Like, how do you motivate people? You've got to think, and I think me and Zac have been quite lucky to have been 21, 22, 25, 26, whatever. And we've had shitty bosses, and we've done these cold calling jobs every single day. Yeah. The day in, you're sat on a dialer, it does it all for you. It goes back to the equation of why is somebody here? What is somebody wanting to get out of it? Some people are money motivated. I would argue that money motivation isn't the biggest thing. We had a top performer here who just wanted to be, they were working at the NHS before and they were actually working from home. They just wanted to be in an environment where everybody was winning and they had fun. We know that cold calling can be a bit of a shit job. It can be really hard. The thrill that you get when you book your first meeting, or a meeting turns into an opportunity, or it closes, is amazing. And we kind of go back to that, can you remain neutral? But there are some incredible wins. It all comes down to what are you doing it for? So like, if you want people to row the boat faster, what's in it for them? Because actually, that's how we as human beings operate. And what we found is probably like a little bit of a secret is knowing that once you get a reward, it's like, well, I've got that reward. Now I'm on to the next level. What's at the end of this level? So knowing that actually I don't want to say the goalposts move, but if somebody is actually, I'm adamant that I want to be this job role. Okay, well, let's get you promoted. Let's get you more money. Let's get you to hit target. Okay, now what do you want? You've got your Rolex, you've got the holiday, you've got the Hyundai i20, whatever it is. How do we now get you to a point where you tick the next box? Because you know the hedonic treadmill, we all adapt to the pleasure that we seek anyway. So what is the next bit? What gets people out of bed in the morning and keeps them moving?
I think that's such an astute point, such an important point. One that I don't think enough people probably recognize is that constant stretch target, that constant evolution of what is a goal, and maybe also not just the goal, but also the process and the systems that they're using. How can we make all of this better and improve it? And constant iteration of the framework and the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. I think that's fantastic, and it's yeah, I'm sure that's a real kind of takeaway point for the audience. So yeah, nice one, good share.
There's a thing there around the staggered goals as well for people who are getting out there on the phones, staggering some of these goals and putting incentives behind certain things. Also, for our team, obviously what people pay for is not a booked meeting. They pay for someone who's physically sat in the chair in front of them with a problem and the motivation. So our commission is purely based on attendance. It's not based on booking. But I know where other agencies perhaps go wrong is it's based on a volume of booking rather than attendance. And those are the people who are posting, I've done 100 meetings today.
Yeah.
Anyone can do that. I've had many a cold call where someone said, have you got these problems? No. Well, do you just want to sit down with me tomorrow and just see if maybe I can help you? It goes straight into, because the urgency is around the booking of the meeting rather than anything. That's very, very unusual. But playing these kind of short and long-term games, because that's how our brain works. There's moments of, right now, I'm in this kind of fighting things off, I'm in the weeds, and then there's moments of rest where I'm at reflection and I'm thinking about my life and my career, and you want to make sure that both parts of the brain are addressed. So playing games short term around the first person who gets to X amount of dials, or changing the commission so it's about the attendance, is going to really help you do that. But also looking at those long-term goals of where does someone want to be, what do they want their life to look like, but probably more importantly, where do they want purpose to be defined? So playing the old man game or old person game with people is great. Like when you're 80 years old, if the percentages you said before are accurate, it might be unlikely, but when you're 80 years old and you look back on this chapter of your life, what would make you feel proud of it? And asking yourself that question asking people that question in their one-to-ones and their performance reviews, and then how can I sculpt that life around you? Not necessarily look at how can I get you to go to Dubai, like more how can I sculpt a life that feels quite purposeful around you? That's going to be a really driving thing.
Yeah, I love it. And we see that in our sales processes as well, right? It's a question that I love to ask, which is, if in X period of time this is going as well as you can possibly imagine, what will change and how will you know? It's exactly that same kind of thing, that future framing type of question. So yeah, I love that. The other thing that this reminds me of is when I work with consultants and I'm kind of coaching them to apply the playbook, we typically look at, for the first couple of weeks, we're looking at volume of calls, and then we're looking at how confident and competent their tone is in the first 30 to 60 seconds, and then we're looking at their problem menu and how well they're navigating that and how concise and effective they are in delivering that. Because at the start, all we really want to do is we just want to set the right intention for those conversations sounding and feeling as natural as possible. And the moment we start saying, go and make some cold calls and pick up a job, it's like, well, A, I have no agency over that. And B, it just creates so much internal pressure that I was reading, I can't remember the exact quote from Seth Godin, but it's something about most salespeople look to the market to solve their problems rather than look to solve the problem that sits in the market. Their whole kind of setup is, how can I get the market or how can I get my clients to help me achieve my target, rather than how can I deliver work that is actually valuable enough that people are willing to pay for it.
There's an interesting point, and we see this a lot with recruitment, so hopefully this helps people. If you've got an idea and I've got an idea, you will always prefer your idea more. That's a very basic thing to understand, right? You've had Benjamin on before. Benjamin's got this thing around someone's favorite subject is always themselves. So combining those two things in your head, someone always prefers their own ideas and their favorite subject is themselves. So we come to know that as a kind of core principle. Now, when you say you're a technical recruiter and you get on a cold call and start telling someone how great you are and all about your experience and your credentials, that becomes about you. Oh, yeah, but I have to get that across. I have to get credibility. If you were out dating people and meeting lots of potential partners, is it important for you to show them how special you are or to make them feel special? Who becomes more memorable? So one of the things that we find works really well on our calls when we've got recruitment clients is something called the IKEA method, which is the idea of getting them to build the idea for us.
Nice.
So look, most people have done a recruitment dance before. It sounds like you've had a particularly prickly experience here, Mr. or Mrs. Prospect. If you were to build your own recruitment agency, what would that need to look like to stand a chance? And they start building an idea, and every idea that they bring up becomes a symptom of a problem. Oh, that's interesting that you said that. Well, why would that be important? Oh, because we got hounded by the last one and I'd want this kind of communication. Okay, that's interesting. Let me make a note of that. And everything they say becomes a symptom, but they're building it as their idea because they prefer their idea and it's all about themselves. And then how could you say no to having a meeting with someone when it was your idea? You've basically built a recruitment agency. How can you say no to sitting down with us after that?
Yeah. I love it. And we know how powerful the imagination is as well, right? We know that as people go through that process, they then, there's another quote, which is, if you're better able to describe somebody's problem than they are, they'll believe you have the solution. And so, helping them to really define that problem will get you a long way too. Guys, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm conscious we're coming up to the last couple of minutes now, and I'm really grateful for you guys to putting the time aside and to joining me today. I think there's a lot of really key takeaways for recruiters to walk away with. If there was one thing that comes up maybe in conversation with your clients in the recruitment space or your clients outside of the recruitment space that we haven't touched on that you think would be really useful, that you'd love people to go away and think about from this episode, what would that be?
The Rolex won't make you happy. Something that we talk about is sometimes so many companies are trying to, and it kind of leans onto what Zac was just saying there anyway, but like most companies will try to define what their USP is, and actually it's the exact same as another recruitment company down the road. Sometimes your USP is the way that you sell. Like people want to know that they can trust you. You don't need to have something shiny and exciting if you're just a good human being that listened. And are you the guy that when I know that the candidate goes tits up and doesn't come into work because they went on a bender the night before, I know that I can pick up the call and you're going to be reasonable and fair, and that could be the selling point enough. You don't need to think about your terms or your rebates. Like think about how you actually deal with human beings.
Yeah, I love that. Reminds me of another friend of the show, Anthony Iannarino, who talks about kind of the way that you sell and aligning that with the buyer's journey. There's so much more we could go into, isn't it? I just think about another 3 hours worth of conversation we could drift off into. But yeah, really good point, Jack. I love that one. Zac, anything from your perspective you haven't covered that you think all recruiters should hear about business development and sales?
To be honest with you, it's not very sexy, but most recruiters that I speak to have a input problem. The input required, and it's a very chicken and egg thing. So what you tend to have is, and maybe this is the way people are aligning the roles, but there is a culture of I would rather work on filling the jobs than get new jobs on. And that's the number one symptom that I would say people come to us with, that then becomes actually you've got a team here when we look at their diaries who just aren't willing to put any extra input in because they feel it's beneath them.
Yeah, right.
So most times I think there is a input problem. So before speaking to any of us on this conversation, I would say first look at the input. And to put it in perspective, you're probably going to need to be doing 100 to 200 dials a day, not conversations, but dials to get anything meaningful out of your day. So if your team are doing 30, 20, 60, you'd probably nowhere near where it needs to be. So to fix that problem first.
I'm so grateful for you to sharing that. I'm going to leave that there, but I'm so grateful that somebody else can raise that point. It's absolutely true, isn't it? And I think a really big part of this is changing the feeling and the culture around sales. And as you say, so many recruiters really do genuinely think of BD as being the least glamorous, the most unsexy part of the job. We've talked about discipline. We've talked about process. We've talked about mindset. We've talked about how difficult it can be to get hold of people and the ways that you need to stand out. What we haven't talked about today, and what we'll definitely pick up in the next episode I'm going to do a solo on this, which is digging into kind of the value of recruitment. What is the true value that recruiters bring to the market, and what can we do to elevate that even further? But I think you guys have raised absolutely crucial points and do such a good job of presenting the kind of the mindset and the need for us to get really good at sales, and the fact that, frankly, it's not only important but can be done really well, and it is something that I believe that more and more recruiters are aspiring to. So super grateful for you coming on the show and helping kind of support that conversation and that message. And yeah, I'll be really, really happy to point anybody who reaches out in your direction. And I'm sure those people listening to this episode will be straight onto your LinkedIn profiles and straight onto the podcast, and we'll include all of the links in the show notes. So Jack and Zac, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank
you
you
very much.